All right, welcome everybody to today's panel entitled Strategies for Reappointment, Tenure, and Promotion as Civically Engaged Academics. This event is sponsored by the APSA Civic Engagement section. My name is Lauren Bell. I am the co-chair of the Civic Engagement section, and I'm very pleased to be today's moderator. With that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give a brief introduction of themselves. As you all introduce yourselves, please tell us the institution you work for and maybe tell us a little bit about that institution, and then summarize the experiences that you've had in the reappointment, tenure, and promotion process. Oh yes, and each of you should do this in less than 2 minutes. So with that, I'm going to go in the order that I can see the panelists on my screen, and I'm going to start with Allison Rank.
Hi, everybody. My name is Allison Rank. I am an associate professor and chair of the political science department at SUNY Oswego. We are a 4-year comprehensive college in upstate New York in the SUNY system. I was tenured and promoted 2 years ago on a portfolio that is almost entirely civic engagement work, doing voter mobilization work with students. So that was across my service portfolio, really embedded in my teaching, and then also sort of where I did a lot of my research. So I haven't had the opportunity to sort of supervise or write letters for anyone coming up. I think I'm here from the end of here's how I built a strategy with the folks who were supervising me. So I'm happy to answer questions about sort of that end of it.
Great. Thank you, Allison. I'm going to turn now to Jeffrey Kraus. Jeff, would you do the same thing? Oh, and you're muted, Jeff.
Okay, I'm no longer muted.
You are no longer muted. We can hear you.
Excellent. You know, we've been doing this for better than 2 years now, and you think I would have gotten the hang of it. But yeah, I'm Jeffrey Kraus. I'm a professor of government and politics at Wagner College, which is located on Staten Island, which is, of course, part of New York City. I have been a member of the faculty here since 1988. During that time, I've been promoted from assistant to associate, then from associate to full professor. And then for a while, a number of years, I was on the dark side as part of the administration here in various roles for about 15 years. And 4 of those years, I was the provost and vice president for academic affairs here before moving back to the faculty. During that time, let's see, I've probably supervised as a department chair 15 people who went through the process of either promotion or tenure. Also served on the college's personnel committee for a number of years, which of course reviewed all those applications. I actually looked back at my files the other day, and I think I've written letters for 8 individuals outside of this institution as a reference. There may have been more. I just couldn't find a record of anything else, so we'll stick with 8. And certainly, as the provost, I made determinations and recommendations during that time for about 30 members of the faculty who were coming up for either promotion or for tenure.
Great. Thank you. All right, I will turn now to Sherri Wallace. Sherri, would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone. First, I want to thank Jeremy for asking me to participate on this panel. I'm happy to be here with Allison and Jeffrey and Connie and you, Lauren. Again, my name is Sherri Wallace, and I began my academic career at Wayne State University. My first tenure track position was at University of Buffalo before I joined the Department of Political Science at the University of Louisville. And I came here as an assistant professor, and I was promoted with tenure to associate professor, and then later promoted to full professor. I'm the first and only Black woman in my department to do so. Currently I'm in the role of interim associate dean for diversity, engagement, culture, and climate in the College of Arts and Sciences. I have, in terms of written letters, well, I also serve as chair of the personnel committee for the college. And I've written letters for promotion and tenure for persons to associate as well as to full. And various institutions, I can't think how many I've done, but it's in the teens. I would say the tens, not the teens, I guess. But that's how many I've done. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And last on my screen is Connie Jorgensen. Connie, would you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon. I'm Connie Jorgensen. I teach political science, and I am the director of our civic engagement programs at Piedmont, Virginia Community College in Charlottesville, Virginia. We do not have a tenure system. So I can't really respond to some of these questions except to explain how we do it differently. When you come on at Piedmont, you get a 1-year contract. You may get a couple 1-year contracts. You get a 3-year contract, and once you get a 5-year contract, you all but have tenure, except you still have to jump through hoops. I did serve on the promotions committee once, which was, very interesting, but I'm going to guess very different from the way it's done at your schools. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much to all of the panelists for being here. I want to start with a fairly kind of open-ended question. You all can kind of think about how you want to answer this question. And Sherri, I'll start with you. What tenure and promotion challenges should folks anticipate with respect to civic engagement work? And you can speak to this from the perspective of your institutions. You can speak to this from the perspective of sort of research and publication, teaching and mentoring, or service. And given the challenges that you anticipate, or that candidates should anticipate, how can faculty be proactive in addressing those challenges?
No, I think it's an excellent question, and I gave it some thought before I, as I was preparing my remarks. I think that when we're talking about, first, as I said, I'm in this role in the college, and so I actually want to broaden civic engagement to community engagement scholarship, which is CES. It's civic engagement is actually embedded in that, because when we're thinking about civic engagement, we're really thinking about ways in which we can work collaboratively to make a difference in civic life in the communities. And when you're thinking about community engaged scholarship, it's in the same vein, and that you're looking at how can we work collaboratively to improve society through science or one's expertise. Both of them, I think, you're working collaboratively with community partners to jointly address issues. And I think that in terms of anticipating challenges, I think one way to kind of think about it is, how can you make an impactful case? How can you show impact? I think it's the same thing when you're presenting any case for tenure promotion. How can you show that you have made impact? And in this case, when it comes to community engagement or even civic engagement, it's impact in the community as well as in your discipline. So one of the and I just want to kind of spotlight too, or just lift up, if you look at the PS Spotlight, April 2022, a lot of the issues that we'll probably be talking about today, many of your colleagues have already talked about it in PS and Spotlight, but there are some other institutions that have a lot of really good resources in terms of how do you make your tenure case using community engaged scholarship or civic. The one thing that I would say is to think about your case in terms of how can you present an integrated case, right? And how all of these things are interrelated, your research, your teaching, and your service, because you should think about these things beyond just service. So how do you present an integrated case, an interrelated case? All of these things work together. How do you get the most bang for your buck for each thing that you do? Whatever thing that you're doing in the community, or whatever project, how can you maybe get research publications off of that? How can you use the data that you're extracting, or that you from the community? How can you use that for research publication? How can you then use that for, let's say, teaching a class and and doing service learning. The courses that I taught were mainly service learning or internship courses. So how might you bring that into your teaching and show impact in that way? Do you want to, is there a model or something that you can, use? And then, of course, even with the service, again, all of it is showing impact, I think. And you should always be looking for multiple ways to present the same thing, but you're doing it from different perspectives. And so you're talking about it in your what do you call it when you're writing it, your portfolio, I'm sorry. You're talking about it in your portfolio, but you're also talking about it in your curriculum vitae, and you're talking about it when you disseminate information to the community. So all of those are ways, and I think the main thing in terms of anticipating the challenges is that how do you best do that? And there is no magic way to do it. I mean, all of the stuff that I know we have a book at U of L, and I'll stop after this. We have a book for tenure promotion using community engaged scholarship. And there's no magic bullet. There's no one way to do it. These are all multiple ways to make the case. And I think that's you just have to figure out what makes impact. And that's at the end of the day, what makes impact.
Great. That's terrific advice. I want to go to Connie quickly, because I know, Connie, you've been really involved at Piedmont, Virginia with the civic engagement initiatives. And I think Sherri's point about showing impact, I know that's something that you've had to think about doing. Can you speak to this idea of showing impact?
Yeah, that's hard. And we all know this is really hard. I'd be rich now if I had the answer. The way we're showing impact right now is what we have, like I said, a 5-year plan, and among the things in the plan is a required civic engagement course. And it's not a standalone course. We've integrated civic engagement knowledge into every discipline, and you have to take one civic engagement course in your discipline to graduate. Okay, so one of the way we're trying to measure impact with this is just by sort of the anecdotal responses to it, but also we are developing, like everybody tries, to do a more longitudinal study. I don't have a whole lot of faith that that's going to happen or if it's going to be really successful, but it's something we'd like to try. I don't really, the question about showing impact is really, really difficult unless you have like really quantitative numbers, like how many people turned out to vote using our NSOLV report, right? How many people showed up for a meeting, you can count numbers, but that doesn't really show the impact on their lives once they leave our school, right?
Right.
So it's all, to me, it's all very short-term analysis. And I ask anybody I know if they have another way to figure this out, because I'm totally clueless.
Sure. Jeff, can I go to you quickly? So you are probably of the people on the panel, you have the most experience with evaluating this kind of work, right? And the portfolios where people would put this sort of work forward. Can you talk a little bit from your perspective, what sorts of things would you be looking for to see the impact that Sherri talked about?
Sure. Well, there are a number of different ways that this can be presented in a portfolio. Certainly it could be presented as scholarship and faculty here. But one of the things I want to mention before I get into that, this is still a challenge at many institutions. In many ways, it is certainly less of a challenge than it was when I first saw tenure here, which was 1993. My God, I would suspect some of the people who might be listening to us may not have even been born then, but nonetheless, it was more of a challenge then because this was all far less accepted back then. What's happened over the years is more institutions are making a commitment to this. more faculty see it as really part of our role and see ways to move forward in terms of tenure by focusing, on this. I think one of the big developments was, the creation a few years ago by the Carnegie Foundation of the community engagement classification. I think there are about 360 institutions that have received that classification over the years. It's an optional classification. There is a process for seeking that institutions have to go through. I know that, here I was, part of that process. So certainly at those 360, or thereabouts institutions, this certainly is much more accepted than it was, back in the 1990s. But I think the good thing is it is more accepted, and there are ways to present it. You can present it, of course, as scholarship, as part of your scholarship in your portfolio. There are vehicles for that scholarship. Unfortunately, not as many as perhaps we would like. The other day, I was thinking about this, and I actually looked at a list that was put together by Laura Lee Sandman, who's at the University of Georgia. She did this a while back, put together a list of journals that published this material. And she found, I think about 35, although a number of those journals, you might say, were a reach. Yes, they may publish material related to civic engagement, but that's not really their focus. There are relatively small number of journals, but nonetheless, it can be presented as scholarship. And I know people who've done that successfully. It could be presented as teaching. Of course, the key there in putting that into the portfolio is really making a direct connection in terms of your evidence between your work in civic engagement or community engagement and its impact on students. And of course, the other way, and frankly, the way I got through here, back then was focusing on service, the service that, we did, not only in terms of the institution, but in terms of the community. If you were taking this approach back when I did, that was perhaps the only road to take. It's still a well-traveled road, especially at institutions that value that kind of thing. But certainly these days, there are avenues for scholarship. And certainly if you've published in the area, or even if you've presented papers at conferences in this field, no reason that can't be included in your portfolio. And if you teach, and it involves civic and community engagement, and I think many more of us do that today. We incorporate this into even our so-called traditional, academic classes. If you can demonstrate that there is a relationship between your teaching and its impact on students, if you can demonstrate in terms of service that your work has an impact not only on the institution, but on the community, and also, frankly, on our students. One of the things is many of our students, even with the requirements that exist in many high schools today, that they have to do some service. My kids in high school had to do that. The idea of connecting that to, the academic performance, in high school, it just seems that they're told they have to do it and they do it and that's it. But I think what we often do when we're doing this is, we connect that work to their academic activity. So I think there are ways, to do it. The one thing I would say is, in terms of putting together a portfolio, don't minimize it. I've seen, folks do this where, because they're still hung up on the more traditional forms of scholarship. And they'll focus in their portfolios on their work there. And in some cases here at Wagner, I knew what they had done. And I'd reach out to them and say, why didn't you mention, this? And they would go, well, I didn't think the committee, the FPC would think it was important. And I said, well, the fact that you didn't include it, they certainly won't think of it at all. But I think it's important to include that work There are opportunities for scholarship in the field. Many of our colleagues have taken those opportunities. I would, urge folks out there who are thinking about it to certainly pursue scholarship in the field, because it really now is an accepted field of scholarship where 25 and 30 years ago it wasn't. And in your teaching, and that old standby service, it's even in institutions that don't really value it at a, as you might say, either as an instructional area or part of scholarship, institutions, at least say they value service. So I think it's important to take what you're doing and literally get into every category possible. The more that you can demonstrate you've done and how it relates to the, you might say, traditional areas of evaluation for, reappointment, promotion, and tenure, the better off you'll be.
Great. Well, and on that note, I want to turn to Allison. Allison, in your introduction, you mentioned that it was 2 years ago that you went up for tenure and promotion to associate. And so probably, again, of everybody on the panel, you have the most recent experience presenting this work. Can you, no pressure, but try to pull together some of what we've heard from Sherri and Connie and Jeffrey and describe your own experience?
Sure. I actually think the thing that's key, if you're in the position I was in a couple years ago, is that everything we've talked about so far is so broad. It's not wrong, but it's not right for your institution, right? So for me, I'm at a comprehensive four-year institution. I talked about how my primary work is in voter mobilization. So I do a lot of voter mobilization work with my students on campus. I was able to get it turned into a course that's in our political science curriculum. So I get the credit for creating a grassroots organizing practicum course that's in the curriculum now. I then used that to do research on the learning outcomes that can be associated with students doing voter mobilization work, which then gets published, right? So sort of taking that thread through, I think that sort of hits on the sort of broader strategy. The thing I'd say that mattered the most for me strategically in making choices is understanding what the pressure points were for my university in particular, right? So I know that at a liberal comprehensive in the SUNY system, we are constantly trying to see where we stack up against other SUNYs, right? So I was really intentional about what are other SUNY competitions are they in for voting and civic engagement? What awards do those places have? Because I know how to pitch that to a tenure committee. My paper didn't win an award at a conference, but I did get recognized by the American Democracy Project for thing X, right? How can you translate your civic engagement work into the kind of external recognitions that a tenure and promotion committee outside of your discipline can recognize, I think is really important. The other thing I'd say is that I became very good friends with the communications and marketing team at my school. I was very good about, I'm running X event. I think here's a pre-done sort of section of a press release. It'd be great if you could send somebody down. My school really likes the photo from 2016 that the college president is in with students registering to vote, folks to vote in Vote Oswego t-shirts, right? Sort of knowing what doing all the work, right? Doing all the steps, but then knowing what you overlay on top of that is your strategy for making it stand out in your university context, so that when your file lands on people's desk, it's like, oh yeah, that's the work that Allison does. Here's how that's made a difference on our campus. And so they're sort of, I think, more conditioned to accept it as that's her portfolio than they might have been otherwise.
Mm-hmm. I'll kind of throw this out there for any of you. As I'm listening to your comments, and they're all really, really wonderful. What I'm thinking, and maybe this goes without saying, but maybe not. Allison, you mentioned having a strategy. This isn't the sort of thing that in that, 8 months before you submit your tenure and promotion portfolio, that you suddenly sit down and say, okay, how am I going to do this, right? It seems to me, and again, any of you who want to comment, that presenting this work, whether it's for reappointment, tenure, promotion, recognition in your own institution, or I'm even thinking, Connie, about the quality enhancement plan, right? Having to report back to SACs and presenting this work. When should people start to think about this?
Well, our system is fairly loose. I mean, it's not a real structured program, but every year you have to have a review with your dean, right? So at the beginning of the year, and for some reason they do this by calendar year, not academic year, but at the beginning of the calendar year, you have to fill out this performance plan, right? You've got a teaching domain, a scholarship domain, and an institutional responsibility domain. And at the beginning of the year, you just list all these things you want to do, right? And at the end of the year, pretty much if you've met them, you're okay, right? You meet expectations, right? But in terms of civic engagement, practically because it's so loose, right? Practically anything you do in civic engagement can go on this plan. Right? I'm teaching a civic engagement course. I developed a civic engagement course, and we don't have to layer it with something except it's teaching, right? Institutional responsibility could be, I'm doing a club, that's civic engagement. So our definition in terms of this is quite broad and quite accepted, in part, Lauren, because of what you said, as the QEP, we have to report this to SACs in 3 years. And, it adds a little bit of institutional support and fear.
So Connie, I hear, in your particular circumstance, thinking about things in a sort of on a yearly basis is really important.
Well,
go ahead.
Oh, and also, at the end of your contract period, you have to do this massive evaluation, right? Which is a kind of a pain, and you have to have a teaching evaluation. Remember, we're a community college, so we're mostly about teaching, right? And so teaching is like the largest thing, and you have to do more in the teaching domain than anything else. And I think I just lost my train of thought, so I'm going to back off for a minute.
Well,
I could chime in.
I was going to ask. Yeah.
Go ahead and finish your question. I'm
Well,
sorry.
I was just going to quickly ask, Connie, what is your contract period as a faculty?
Okay, when you're hired on a 1-year contract.
Okay.
You may be reappointed on another 1-year contract, or you could be reappointed or appointed to a 3-year contract. Okay. Then at the end of the 3-year contract, you may have to do another 3-year, or you'll get a 5-year. Once you've got the 5-year appointment, you still have to jump through all those annual hoops and so on and so forth. But that's in essence the equivalence of tenure for us. Now, promotion's a whole nother process. But if you have a 5-year contract, unless you screw up, or you're pretty much got tenure.
Sure. So even though you're thinking about things on an annual basis, that 5-year contract or the 3-year contract does give you a block of time where you can be strategic about what you're doing as you lead up to that next big evaluation.
Right.
So Sherri, let me go to you. How do you think about the timing of these plans?
Well, first, I would just encourage everyone to think of yourselves as an academic, which you are. Oftentimes we think that just doing civic engagement, somehow we're different from traditional scholars. We're not. The work that you're doing is just as rigorous, it's just as involved. And so in the same way in which you're planning out your tenure and promotion process over the 7-year period, or really 6-year period, it's the same way you should think about, your work as a civically engaged scholar. So we also have a designation, Jeffrey, as a community engaged university from the Carnegie Mellon County Foundation. I'm sorry. And so we developed this community engaged scholarship handbook, to use as a guide for how you think about going and documenting what you're doing from day one. in this scholarship. So I mean, in this area. So so you think about the activities that you have planned, and think about what documentation do you need in terms of research, documentation in terms of teaching, documentation in terms of service, and how all of it, and just start keeping up with that, and thinking about as Allison said, all of the different activities that you're using, and the multiple ways in which you can use those activities when you go to start documenting in your portfolio. And so, and as I said, we have a wonderful guide, and we use it as a guide because we also have a medical school here. And the medical school does a much better job at doing community engaged scholarship. I'd say that we, in social sciences, we're still getting there. We're still trying to figure it out. But the good thing is that some of the models that they use, we can use. And literally, I can put in the chat what this handbook looks like, because again, I borrow when I'm out there looking and trying to pull together the community engagement plan here in the college. I borrow from other universities, University of Wisconsin-Madison, the Mortgage Center for Public Service. They have a wonderful paper on how to document, how do I present my case for tenure and community engaged scholarship, which you can also civic engage. Indiana, think of someone like Elizabeth Binion, who's has done this work. Indiana University, let's see, Nebraska, and Ohio State. I mean, you can go out there and find multiple ways and models where they actually have it in their PNT guidelines. We're still getting that in our PNT guidelines, but we have the handbook to help us as a guide. And that handbook basically tells us from early on, create a template, right? And in that template, what's your planned activity? Okay. What role will the community play? Who are you going to be your partners? What are your academic outcomes? What are your community outcomes, and how are you going to document each one of these products? And so if you start thinking about, as you're collecting stuff in all of these areas, you'll have all of this stuff in your e-portfolio, and you'll be able to translate that in your story or in your narrative for tenure promotion. So there are so many ways, and I think Jeffrey said it, and I'll say it again. There's so many ways to do this, but again, we have to find ways to do it effectively and efficiently, but there are many ways in which it can be done.
Thank you for those comments. And I'll just sort of use the privilege of my role as moderator. Some of you have heard me say this before. Every institution has assessment committees and resources available for assessment. And so thinking back to Sherri's initial point about impact, and thinking toward Allison's point about strategy, go talk to the assessment folks on your campuses. Ask them, how can I document what I'm doing? How can I identify what my learning outcomes are, and then marshal evidence from it, even if the evidence, as Connie suggests, is the anecdotal evidence, it's the narratives that come from students describing their experiences. Your assessment folks on your campus can be really important partners in helping you to gather that information that demonstrates impact. I want to turn to a couple of different questions, but before I do that, I want to just remind our audience that we are happy to take questions. And so if you have a question for the panel, you're welcome to put it in the chat at your convenience. Certainly, if anyone has any follow-up questions from this, really what I think has been a wonderful conversation about kind of how do you anticipate challenges and present your work, please feel free to ask those at this point. As we either wait for questions to come in or give people some time to think about them, I want to turn maybe to a question, and Connie, I might start with you on this because I think you've touched on this already. How many of you are at institutions where civic engagement work is explicitly supported by either the governance structure, the institutional mission, or the curriculum? Because I think it would be helpful perhaps for people to hear, is it just that you all are at institutions that are totally on board with this already? So I'll sort of turn to each of you in turn to talk a little bit about those kinds of governance and mission curricular questions. But Connie, let me start with you.
Yeah, let me start with how our college really got engaged in civic engagement, right? You know, I live in Charlottesville, Virginia, which, as you might remember, was the site of the Unite the Right rally in 2017. We've been doing some very minor civic engagement work, like registering voters, but that's about as far as it went. After the Unite the Right rally, faculty began raising questions about, how do I talk about this in my class? What should I not say? What should I say? How do we, raising all these really great civic engagement questions, right? And then SACS was coming. And so it's kind of like this perfect storm. We had to do a QEP. The college voted it was going to be on civic engagement. So now we have a 5-year commitment, not only from the college, but again, we have to report on this to SACS in a couple years. Now, having said that, so we have a lot of support. Anything you do in civic engagement, people love, right? But on the other hand, with the sort of political climate and the atmosphere of getting students in the door and out the door as quickly as humanly possible, quote, barriers like civic engagement requirements may find themselves on the chopping block, because the impetus is to remove any kind of barrier. So to have a civic engagement course might be considered a barrier. So I have a concern how this plays out over the years, and if then you can still use civic engagement on your plans.
Sure, and just to provide a little bit of context for people who might not be at a SACS institution, I'm guessing Sherri, Louisville probably is, but I'm not sure. Randolph-Macon, where I am, is a SACS institution. SACS is our regional accreditor, and they require a QEP, a quality enhancement plan, which is a 5-year plan every 10 years to improve some aspect of your campus environment. And so the great thing is that for 5 years, institutions put tons of resources into whatever it is they've decided will be their QEP for those 5 years. At the end of the 5 years, it's always a question of whether the momentum that's built over those 5 years continues, or institutions decide, okay, we checked off that box with SACS, and so now we're moving on to something else. So just to provide a little bit of context for Connie's explanation. But what about the others on the panel? Do you happen to just be at institutions that are incredibly supportive of this through your governance documents, or have you had to carve out your own path?
So I can answer this, and I think then also answer the question that came in for me in the chat
Sure.
about whether or not I was hired with the expectation that I would create the voter mobilization project. I was not hired with that expectation. So SUNY Oswego also has the Carnegie classification for community engagement, but I would say we are very good at community engagement, and the section within that is civic or political is actually our weak spot, right? So in terms of service, we do a really good job on this campus, but the connection between that and sort of advocacy, politics, making change through political structures has not been sort of as much a part of that conversation here. So I started here in 2014. So big midterm year, and the voter mobilization program consisted of 2 students in Rock the Vote t-shirts sitting quietly behind a table 2 days a week for 6 weeks. And as somebody who had been a political organizer, that really, I kind of just couldn't take that was both what we were sort of offering to students, and that we were missing out on what doing voter mobilization work can provide for students who want to get into campaign work. I'm at a rural institution. We're 45 minutes north of Syracuse. Students either have to have a car and be able to go to Syracuse, or do like a semester in Washington to get good campaign experience. And I had the background to essentially say, I'm going to build this out, and I can get students some legitimate experience to be able to talk about, these are my grassroots organizing skills. I know how to prep a phone bank. I know how to run a meeting, etc. And that's largely how I pitched it. We actually had, I think in 2015, our academic affairs retreat involved faculty could sign up to make a 1-minute pitch for something they wanted to do. the 3 ideas that got the most votes from the folks in attendance got $1,000 of seed money. I got $1,000 of seed money and was off to the races. And so that's how I got it started. And now that it's kind of a proven entity, it took a number of election cycles. Now that it's a proven entity, sort of the campus is much more willing to sort of invest time and resources in other people sort of using, sort of contributing and using what's been put in place, which has been really gratifying. But I was not at all hired with the expectation that this is what I would do.
So let me maybe go to Jeff. I think you said that you also have the Carnegie classification at Wagner. Is that right?
Yes, we do.
How does that manifest itself in terms of what Wagner is doing institutionally?
Sure. Well, we've had, as I mentioned before, a longstanding commitment to civic engagement. Richard Garassi, who was the president here for a number of years, and before that was provost, is really still a leader in that field in terms of civic and community engagement. How has it manifested itself here? We have a civic engagement minor. We've had that for about 5 years now. Before the pandemic, and I'm sure this is the case at many institutions, we had a very substantial civic engagement program. It included something called the Port Richmond Project, which was our partnership with a poorer community here on Staten Island that involved our students involved in various projects in that community, and also students from the high school there taking courses here at Wagner. One of the, of course, casualties of the pandemic is that many of our civic engagement activities, and this is true at a number of institutions, had to be put on pause simply because of the pandemic conditions. And, one of the challenges in the last year has been to try to rebuild all of that. And I know, speaking to folks at other institutions, they faced a similar challenge, but here, as I said, it manifested itself in terms of our curriculum, in terms of our work with the larger Staten Island community. Also, of course, it's something that our faculty personnel committee considers as part of the reappointment, promotion, and tenure process. And we've been doing this, as I said, for over 20 years. Of course, the last couple of years have been a challenge in that, we're trying to rebuild and also learn from the pandemic in terms of what we can do in the future. And part of the downside there is that many of the organizations that we worked with here on Staten Island fell by the wayside simply because of the conditions during the pandemic. They couldn't do their work. In some cases, their leadership was impacted directly by the pandemic. So there's a lot of rebuilding going on. But in terms of Wagner, it's a longstanding commitment. It's reflected in our curriculum. It's reflected in our, you might say, work with the community. And as I said, it's also reflected in our process of reappointment, promotion, and tenure.
Great. I'm watching the clock, and shockingly, 45 minutes has already gone by. And so I do want to get to a couple of other questions. One of the things that comes up a lot in conversations about reappointment, tenure, and promotion, particularly for faculty at institutions where their tenure and promotion committees are made up of members from all across the campus. The question is how to make civic engagement work understandable to folks who are not social scientists. And I would maybe extend that question to, we've talked a little bit about kind of the polarized environment we're in now, how to bridge skepticism among colleagues, perhaps who are not political scientists, that this work is legitimate work and not simply political proselytizing. What would you recommend to folks who are thinking, I've got to pitch this not just to my department, but to people from all across the campus who are skeptical? What advice would you give? Connie, you look like you're ready to jump in.
Well, one of the things that we discovered, first off, the faculty, when we first brought up civic engagement classes, the response was, I don't know how to teach civic engagement. I don't know what civic engagement is. My course has too much content in it. I can't fit one more thing in. I mean, you can kind of just list the reasons it was a bad idea, all of which are very valid reasons. But what we discovered is that many of our faculty were doing civic engagement in their classroom anyway. They just weren't defining it that way. And once they saw that and kind of wrapped it around their content, they were much more willing to do it. And in fact, a lot of the faculty that teach civic engagement classes, that's all they want to teach, because they find it has changed the way they teach so much, and they're much more satisfied with what they're doing, and they can still get all the content in. So, and you know, if I've got a physics professor that loves this, physics, math people are loving this. They just have to learn that they're really doing this already, and it's not that complicated.
Great. Sherri, I know, well, you and Jeffrey both have some additional administrative experience. Do you have some perspectives maybe on how to make this understandable to folks who are not in our field?
I think that anything that you do, whenever you're promoting your case, first of all, you know, you want to make sure that what you're doing, that that your chair and your colleagues, they've all been educated in, you know, in terms of what you're doing, and they can also stand with you as your support and advocate in the work that you're doing, and that it's showing up in the letters that they write, and the letters that you get from people who are expert in the field, you know, that can speak to, again, the legitimacy and the impact of this work. And I think that as long as you can do that, and you can show any type of measurable outcomes, because in any discipline that where you're, you know, you're putting your case forward, you're trying to show that you've met your goals with measurable outcomes. And I don't care what discipline it is, that's just it. In terms, whether it's traditional, what we call traditional research, or what we call community engaged research. And so that's what you're looking to be able to do. So anything that you can do to describe or explain across those three areas, but again, integrated as much as possible, because as Allison was saying, you have to think strategically. How does this work for me in all of these different areas? And any evidence, again, in terms of not just of your referee articles, but your policy papers, your media attention that you know, work that you publish in the media, brochures, you know, the projects, whatever you've done in the community, that they can speak to the impact. Did it lead to a policy change, right? Did it lead to something different being done in the community? Did they adopt what you basically argued for, you know, or you presented? Did you have your students go and do a service learning project that where they discovered a better way to do something, and that became something that was adopted by the community organization? All of these are impacts. Can you show evidence of an award, like Allison said? Funding, any type of funding, you know, any type of funding, you know, whether it's a large grant or a small grant. Can you demonstrate that you can attract funding for what you're doing? And then, of course, anything that can show some type of national or international reputation. Did someone somewhere else in the country adopt what you're doing? Whether it's something that you published in a teaching and learning journal, or whether you published it or they tried to replicate it with the work that you were doing in a referee journal article, traditional journal article. So all of these things, I think, are ways in which, and then lastly, and I think this is the one that at this level matters the most, and people don't think about it. And Allison has already kind of underscored it. And how does the work that you do appeal to institutional ideals? And then it is the mission of the university and the community. How does it bring value to the community? Does the community value you being there? And can you demonstrate that they value you being there? We are a metropolitan, we are urban metropolitan college with a university. We are the largest metropolitan area in the state of Kentucky, Louisville. And so we have to show that we're good neighbors and that, we're giving back to the community in the same way in which the community is a partner with us. But again, how does this show in terms of retention and graduation, those kinds of things, that kind of impact? I think Allison said that. How does it lead to mentorships, not only in terms of students, but also with other faculty that you're helping them, get involved with this kind of work? So it's the same, and that's why I want to say, don't think of yourself as someone. Well, obviously, what you love, civically engaged academic, but also think of yourself just as a scholar, because you bring the same type of rigor, the same type of methods, and all this other stuff to this work than you do whether you're doing international relations or comparative politics or American politics or theory. You know what I mean? It's the same. It's just a different way of measuring impact. But again, you want to have clear goals with measurable outcomes and across the board, whatever you do. And I think that's what the personnel committee looks for. And in the letters, I think, are very important. Who you choose to write your letters, I think that's also very important, because they need to be someone, and not all journals, not all universities rank journals. Some universities is very important now. They want to know what is the H index on it. But I think just having good people, you have credible scholars to write your letters to demonstrate the fact that this is good scholarship. And I think you'll be fine. It just depends on where you are. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Sherri. I want to go quickly to Allison before I kind of ask a summary question. Allison, did you give any thought in putting your materials together to making what you do understandable to others? And that could include to your letter writers. Yeah, maybe piggyback on Sherri a bit.
Yeah, so we don't have to have external letters for associate where I am. So some of this goes back to what I was saying about know what the pressure points are at your institution, right? So for going up for full, I'll need external letters. And so I have been thinking sort of my strategies are changing in terms of where I'm sort of trying to make connections once I got tenure and was promoted to associate, but I didn't have to have external letters. So what I actually did, I had letters from student affairs folks on my campus in my file, because for me, that was who could back up and say, when we're doing this, when we're trying to engage students, this is a person that is a partner to us on the faculty and is sort of coming out and adding that curricular content to where some of our civic and community service is that hasn't been sort of necessarily provided in this way in the past. And sort of talking about the limitations that they had with getting a voter mobilization program up and running, and what I had done to really sort of shift that on our campus. And so, yeah, I didn't, I know, I see Elizabeth in the chat. Yeah, I didn't need them. But it was about, again, as Sherri's saying, it's the evidence, right? Who on my campus could provide the backup that said, yes, what she is saying she does on our campus, if you haven't seen it, is what she has done on our campus.
Great. All right, so we're going to call this the lightning round, because I'm trying to keep a very close eye on time. So basically in 30 seconds or less from each of our panelists, and I'll start with Jeff, but then move kind of through my screen. What's the kind of final word? What's the one sentence takeaway that you want people to leave here thinking about in terms of civic engagement work and reappointment, tenure, and promotion? One sentence.
Be proud of your work.
Excellent. Be proud of your work. Allison. At a certain kind of institution, you can make this the focus of your work and not an add-on.
Terrific. Sherri.
I would say plan ahead, but also plan for failure. Basically, you have to build the relationships. Because this is, again, it's collaborative. You have to build relationships. It takes time. Be patient. Plan ahead, but also plan for failure, because the first time you try it may not go as well.
Great. And lastly, Connie, your one sentence.
Civic engagement is part of the mission of higher education, and we shouldn't forget that.
Terrific. In just a moment, I'm going to ask us to use the reactions feature. So thank our panelists. I just want to say that I've been taking notes. You can, well, you probably can't see, it's very bright in here, but I've been taking notes all over this piece of paper. And so a couple of takeaways as we move toward the conclusion of our panel. Focus on impact. That involves assessment, data, documenting student learning outcomes, finding your partners on campus. On that point, enlist the support of people on the campus. Some of the people who were mentioned by the panelists, your chair, your departmental colleagues, your marketing office. I think that was a really wonderful point that Allison made. 3, think about framing and being strategic. How do you describe what you're doing and how are you framing it? And to Jeffrey's point, not kind of shying away or running away from it, but being proud of it. On that note, as Jeffrey pointed out, civic engagement work can be anything. It can fit into any of these categories. So figure out how you want to explain what you're doing. And then the last kind of key takeaway that I've written down is to put things into terms that are broadly understandable to the people who are going to be reviewing your materials. Talk about funding, talk about the links to the mission of your institution, talk about awards you've won or recognition you've received, talk about student retention, talk about mentoring. So I hope that this has been useful for everybody who has attended today and for those who will watch the recording. I want to thank all of you for what I think was a truly wonderful discussion, one of the best panels that I've been a part of, and ask the audience that as you depart, if you can find the reaction buttons, throw up a round of applause for all of our panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Or
Thank you.
actual applause is okay too, Elizabeth. Yes, thank you.
Easier than finding reaction bed.
Yes, you could actually do this too. I was trying to let people know. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.